In today's Gospel, Jesus invites each of us to remain in His love, by keeping His commandments and living in close union with God. Complete joy does not come from the world, but from the love and presence of God in our hearts. Let's listen and meditate on today's words of God to live a life of rich and grace-filled faith. In a small village nestled on the mountainside, where the church bells still ring every morning and evening, there lived a man named James. He did not stand out from the crowd, was not rich or powerful, but in his eyes, there was a peace that many people searched for their whole lives but never reached. James was a retired teacher. After many years of teaching, he devoted the rest of his life to prayer, reading the Bible, and quietly helping those around him. He often sat by the window, praying the rosary, watching each falling leaf. People used to say, he lived as if he had met God. And indeed, he had met God, not through a great vision or a spectacular miracle, but through a very quiet call, "Remain in my love." That call came to him one afternoon more than 20 years ago, when his life fell into the darkness of loss and disappointment. His beloved wife passed away due to a serious illness. His only son left home and followed the wrong path. He fell down, blamed himself, thought that God had forgotten him. But in the midst of that darkness, there was a quiet light shining, a verse of God's word that he happened to read again in the Gospel of John, "Remain in my love." John 15:9. From that day on, James began his journey to stay, not a journey of withdrawal from the world, but a journey of commitment to live in the world with a deep and abiding love, the love of Jesus. He began to understand that full joy does not come from having everything go our way, but from letting ourselves be swept away by the flow of God's love. James's story is not unique. Throughout the ages, from the great saints to the anonymous ones in the shadows, God has continued to call, "Abide in my love." It is not just a moral teaching, but a life, a relationship, a living and personal union. This journey is not easy. It requires self-denial, taking up the cross every day, fighting the temptations of selfishness, fear, and despair. But at the end of the road, there is a promise, full joy. Not the fleeting joy of the world, but a joy that cannot be taken away, because it is born of eternal love itself. And so, in that small village, in that crowded city, in that quiet monastery, in that crowded hospital bed, and even in that lonely room at the end of the street, there are countless souls learning to stay. They are not as bright as the stars, but they shine silently like small candles before the blessed sacrament. The mountains and forests of late autumn are covered in a yellow coat. The wind blowing through the leaves rustles like the sigh of time. In a small village called Bethany, not a village in the Bible, but an anonymous piece of land nestled in the middle of the highlands, there is an old wooden house nestled under the shade of an old camphor tree. There lives an old man named James. James is over 70 this year. His hair is white. His skin is tanned. His eyes are both deep and gentle. The villagers love him, but few know much about his past. He lives alone. No wife. No children. No relatives who often visit. Every morning, he wakes up early, walks to church, sits in the last row, quietly prays the rosary, then goes home to tend to his small garden with a few rows of vegetables and the only fig tree in the yard. Whenever asked about life, he just smiles. God is still with him. That's enough. But no one knew that there was a time when James was living in a fierce inner storm. 25 years ago, he was the principal of a famous high school in the city. He had a gentle wife named Maria and a smart, active son named Joseph. His family was once called the ideal model. Then, disaster came like a flood. Maria was diagnosed with terminal cancer when she was not yet 50 years old. She passed away in his arms after 8 months of silent struggle, leaving behind an emptiness that could not be filled. But the pain did not stop there. Just a year later, Joseph, the son in whom he had placed all his hopes, suddenly left home, taking with him a group of bad friends. leaving behind a short letter, "I do not want to live a hypocritical life anymore." James collapsed. He blamed God. He smashed the cross hanging in his bedroom. He refused to pray, and did not enter a church for 3 years. At times, he thought of death as an escape from the harsh silence of the God he had believed in. But one night, in a sleepless stupor, he turned to his old Bible, an old habit that had not yet died. His eyes stopped at the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 9. "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Remain in my love." Just a short sentence, but it was like a call from the depths. Jacob could not explain why his heart was moved. He had read that sentence hundreds of times when he was a devout Catholic. But that night, that word of God was no longer a distant sacred idea, but a gentle voice in the darkness of his soul. Remain in my love. Not what to do. Not be better. Not go back to being the moral person you were before, but a gentle invitation, remain. As if Jesus knew very well that he was running away, that he was in pain, that he was drying up, and he did not condemn. He only invited. James sat motionless before that sentence for almost an hour. From that day on, he began again. Not in a hurry. Not loudly. Not forcing himself to pray as before. Every morning, he would just recite that one sentence. Like drinking the little drops of water that fell from the sky, "Remain in my love." And strangely, something inside him began to revive. Like a small flame burning in the ashes. Not a bright light, but a warmth, a slow but steady burn. From that night on, every day James rose before the sun. He stepped out onto the porch, stood silently, and watched the mist rising over the distant mountain tops. He no longer prayed in long words, no longer read entire chapters of the Bible as he had before. Just a soft whisper, "I want to stay in your love. If you still want me to stay." Nothing had changed in the world around him. The fig tree still bore few fruits. The roof still leaked when it rained heavily. The wooden bench in the church was as old as ever. But one thing was slowly changing, he himself. James began to pay more attention to the sunlight filtering through the cracks in the door, the birds singing on the porch, the smell of coffee in the early morning. He began to write in his diary, not to complain or tell stories, but as a silent invitation, "Today I stay here. Lord, even though you are silent, I still believe that your love has not left me." One morning, after many weeks of living silently in that stream of prayer, James saw a boy sitting and crying on the steps of the church. He was about 9 or 10 years old. His feet were scratched. His clothes were torn. His face was dirty. He did not ask many questions. He just sat down next to him, took out a small loaf of bread from his pocket, and gave it to him. The child took it, but did not eat it. He looked at him, his eyes full of doubt. "What is your name?" James asked gently. "My name is Guan," he said softly, his eyes still red. "Why are you here alone?" "I was kicked out of the house. My mother died. My father did not want to raise me anymore." James felt his heart tighten. He had lost his wife. Now, he was standing before a child who had lost his mother. He understood that feeling of loss very well, and he also understood that the most terrible thing was not losing a loved one, but the feeling that he was no longer needed. He did not preach, nor did he explain about faith. He just reached out and gently touched the boy's shoulder. "You can sit here with me. You don't have to do anything. Just stay." A seemingly simple sentence, but the boy suddenly burst into tears. That night, James made him a cup of ginger tea and lent him an old sweater. He fell asleep on the sofa in the house, curled up like a kitten that had just been pulled out of a storm. Meanwhile, James sat in front of the wooden cross that had been hung again after many years. He looked at Jesus, no longer the strict God he had thought, but the silent companion who whispered to him every day with a single sentence, "Stay in love." And now he has begun to live that saying, "Stay," not by words, but by presence. Guan woke up when the sun was already high. the light shining through the wooden window onto the table where Mr. Jacob was still writing in his diary. He rubbed his eyes, sat up, and was a little startled because he was not at home. But when he saw the old man was attentively writing, not bothering him, he slowly walked closer. "Uncle, you are not chasing me away?" Kwon's voice was lost, like someone who was used to being rejected. Jacob raised his head, smiled. "No. If God let you sit here last night, then I believe He has a reason." Kwon did not fully understand the meaning of the sentence, but he felt his chest suddenly warm up. The feeling of being needed, of being accepted, quietly crept into his soul, like the first drop of sunshine after a long rainy season. From that day on, Kwon stayed with Jacob. No one officially said it, but everything happened as if it was predestined. James taught the boy how to light a wood stove, how to water plants, how to plant vegetables, and how to read simple verses from the Bible. He was unfamiliar with words like grace, holiness, and mercy, but he quickly memorized the sentence, "Whoever remains in love remains in God, and God remains in him." Kwon did not know who God was. But if God was like this old man, not scolding, not pushing him away, not asking too many questions, he felt much closer to him than what he had heard adults say at the rare ceremonies he had been taken to. One afternoon, while the two of them were picking vegetables, Kwon blurted out, "Uncle James, do you have any children?" Jacoby paused. He was still holding the basil, but his eyes were looking far away. "Yes. A child. His name is Joseph." "Where is he now?" He was silent for a moment, then exhaled softly. "He's gone far away. I don't know if he's still alive." Kwon bowed his head. He felt like he had just touched something very private. But Jaiko was not angry. On the contrary, he put his hand on his shoulder and squeezed it gently. "But I still stay here, stay in love. That's the only thing I can do." That sentence became the red thread connecting two souls that seemed to be strangers. An old man who had lost everything. A boy who had never known what true love was. But in that old wooden house, in the middle of a small garden, they learned together to stay, not because of the past, nor because of the future, but because love was still present. Every day, dawn broke over the village. The warm light began to soften the cold morning air. James and Kwon were standing in the garden, tending to the vegetable beds that the boy had planted a few months ago. Kwon was no longer the lost boy who did not know about love or the joy of life. He began to understand more about the work of his hands, about the joy of seeing a plant grow strongly, like life was quietly developing in his own soul. One day, while James was watering the vegetable beds, Kwon held a small Bible in his hand. He was not a person who read the Bible much, but the words in it kept echoing in his heart. Today, he tried to read again the sentence that James had shared with him, "Whoever remains in love remains in God, and God remains in him." Kwon felt that those words were very strange, but also very close. He put the Bible down on the table and looked at James, asking, "Uncle James, what is God's love? I don't understand it yet." Jacob smiled. His eyes lit up, as if looking into a new future for Kwon. "You know, Kwon, God's love is not a vague feeling or a fragile emotion. That love is a presence, a staying. When you love someone, you will not only say the words "I love you," but you will always be there when that person needs you. Stay by their side in happy times, sad times, when they are weak or strong. Kwon looked at him, his eyes shining with curiosity, but also a little confused. "But how do you know that God loves you, or loves me?" Jacob gently placed his hand on Kwon's shoulder. A warm and loving gesture. "You know, God's love is shown through very simple things. God loves you through the moments when you are loved and cared for. You live, eat, study, play. All are gifts from Him. And that love will also grow in you when you learn to love others. When you give without expecting anything in return." Kwon nodded. His eyes seemed to light up a little. He began to understand more about what James had shared. But a part of his heart still had unanswered questions. Under the shade of the old fig tree where they often sat for a nap, James told Quan about his past. He was not in a hurry, did not tell too many sad things. But in each story there was a deep sharing. Do you know, Quan, I used to be a very different person. I lived in the hustle and bustle of work, family, and fame. But then, one day, I lost my beloved wife. And from then on, I lost my way. He paused, his eyes looking into the distance. His story was like a scar on his soul. But he did not regret what had happened. He had found healing in God's love. And he wanted to share that with Quan. I was in pain. But I also realized that it was in the pain that I felt God's love. He never abandoned me. Even though I couldn't see him at that time, God was always by my side. But I didn't realize it because my heart was so closed at that time. Quan looked at him, sympathy beginning to grow within him. He could not fully understand what James had gone through. But he began to understand that there are sufferings that are not meant to drag us down but to teach us how to rise up. How to truly live. Jacoby continued. God has healed me, Quan. And I believe that no matter what pain or loss you have, God will heal you. You just need to stay in his love. Quan was silent, bowing his head in thought. He remembered the dark nights when he felt abandoned, felt like no one needed him anymore. But today, he felt different. Perhaps, the path to healing begins with the very first steps in love and presence. And perhaps, for James, he had found a family, a place where love was never lacking. Day by day, Quan felt the change in himself. He not only saw the warm sunlight shining on the vegetable garden, but also felt a different warmth in his heart. The words that James shared every morning and evening seemed to penetrate his soul, healing old wounds that he did not know about. One morning in June, when the shower had just stopped, Quan stood by the window looking out at the backyard. The trees were green. The flowers were blooming. He felt light, as if the atmosphere around him was softening. And then, he wondered, am I really healed? Quan turned to look at James, who was sitting and arranging old letters. He walked closer and asked, Uncle, if I live in God's love, can I change my past? James did not answer right away. He put his hand on the book and looked at Quan for a long time. Then he smiled and replied in a warm voice, your past is a part of you. But it is not everything. Healing does not come from changing what has happened, but from learning to see and face that past with a new heart. A heart filled with God's love. You cannot change what has happened, but you can change the way you live and see yourself. Quan was silent, pondering James's words. He thought about the days when he lived in loneliness, feeling unable to find any love. Now, he realized that healing did not come immediately, but through small steps in life every day. And through each time he felt God's love. Quan returned to the vegetable garden, where he had started to plant the first seeds of his life. The young vegetables were growing, although in the early days they were weak and vulnerable. But through the care, watering, and loving of each seedling, Quan learned to love himself. That love is not something too distant or mysterious, but rather patience, presence, and care in every moment. A month later, while going out to buy food, Quan accidentally met an old friend. It was Lam, a boy who had been Quan's only close friend during the years he lived with his old family. Lam still had the same familiar face, except that his eyes were no longer as bright as before. Quan felt a little confused when he saw Lam. Not knowing how to start the conversation, Lam looked at him, a little surprised, then asked, Quan, are you okay? Quan nodded, but didn't know what else to say. The silence lasted until Lam spoke softly, where did you go? Where is your family? A cold wind suddenly blew through, bringing with it Quan's old memories. He remembered the days before he came to Jacob, remembered his family, but also remembered the pain, the arguments, and the sleepless nights because of fear. They're gone, Quan sighed. trying to keep his voice from breaking. "I'm with Mr. Jacob now." Lamb was surprised. His eyes seemed unable to believe what he had just heard. "Who is he?" "Probably just a strange old man." "Right?" Quan was silent. But his eyes looked straight at Lamb. Without any fear. "He's the one who taught me how to live. Taught me how to love and forgive." Lamb didn't say anything more. Just turned away. But Quan could feel. The suffering in Lamb was the same as in himself. They were both carrying memories that could not be erased. But Quan understood that if we didn't face the past, we wouldn't be able to move forward. And God had given him this opportunity to face it. Quan realized that the journey of healing was not only about finding joy in God's love, but also about facing the unhealed parts of his past, the dark parts of himself. In order to move forward, he was determined not to hide anymore. Quan sat at the wooden table in Jacob's small room, the summer breeze blowing in, bringing coolness. He looked out at the vegetable garden, where lush green plants and colorful flowers were growing. But there was still a void in his heart. It was a tear in his soul, a feeling of not being able to let go of past wounds. He remembered his family, the painful memories he could not forget, and also the anger and disappointment he felt for himself. One day, Jacob came to Quan while he was tending the plants. He placed a hand lightly on Quan's shoulder, sat down next to him, and was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke in a deep voice, "You can feel God's love in your heart, Quan, but to truly live in that love, you need to learn to forgive. Forgive yourself. Forgive those who have hurt you. Only when you can do this, will you feel the peace that God wants to give you." Quan bowed his head, thinking about what James had just said. He had forgiven others in his life, his parents, his old friends, even Lamb, but he could not forgive himself. His past was like a long shadow, surrounding his heart, and no matter how much he wanted to erase it, it still haunted him every moment. James continued, "Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. Forgiveness is the way to not be imprisoned by the past. It is the act of loving yourself and letting God's love heal the wounds you cannot heal yourself." Quan heard and felt the depth of James's words. He remembered the time when he was a child. He was abandoned in his own home. The feeling was like a wound that never healed. And now, he knew that to live fully in God's love, he had to step out of the shadow of the past. Forgiveness was the key to opening the door to peace. The next day, Quan decided to sit down, quietly and calmly. He closed his eyes and began to face the pain in his heart. He imagined himself standing in front of a river, the clear water washing away all the wounds and sorrows. He imagined himself standing there, watching his old wounds drift away, slowly fading into space. He felt light, as if he were being released. He thought of his parents, the people who had brought him pain, but had also taught him important lessons. He thought of the times they had argued, the times they had blamed him, but he also remembered the times they had loved and cared for him. He had been angry with them, but now, in God's love, he wanted to forgive. He wanted to cut off the resentment, so he could live in peace. But forgiveness did not come easily. It required him to face the truth in his heart, to look at the old pain without fear. Quan felt a rupture in his soul, as if a shell had gradually dissolved around his heart. He understood that only when he forgave himself could God heal the remaining wounds. One weekend, Quan decided to write a letter to his parents. He didn't know if they were still alive, but he knew this was the first step in his journey of forgiveness. He wrote with all the love and forgiveness in his heart, pouring out all the feelings he had never dared to express. In the letter, he apologized for the times he couldn't understand or forgive them, and he prayed for them, wherever they were. As he placed the letter in the envelope, Quan felt a relief he had never felt before. He no longer had to carry the burden of anger and sad memories. He felt like he had begun to step out of the darkness. Quan stood before the door of another house, where he felt peace and love overflowing. It was James's house, but it was more than just a house. It was where he had found new life. A place where you learn to live in God's love, so that you no longer have to live in the pain of the past. And now, you know that, no matter the stormy days or the difficult challenges, God's love is always there, waiting for you, guiding you every step of the way. After months of living under the guidance of James, Kwon felt that he was no longer a stranger to himself. He had learned how to face the wounds in his heart. And more importantly, he had felt God's unconditional love. Kwon was not only healed, but also invited to share that gift with those around him. Spring had come, and as the chrysanthemums bloomed, Kwon knew that this was the time for him to begin a new mission in his life. He could not live in the comfort of being alone, could not let God's love be only his own. God had given him a great love, and now, he had to share that love with those who needed it. Kwon sat down at the table in the garden, where he had written the letter to his parents. Now, he was contemplating his mission. He looked out at the petals swaying in the wind, wondering, how can I share this love with those around me? Jacoby, his beloved teacher, walked over and sat down beside Kwon, looking into his thoughtful eyes. Are you ready to go on your mission? James asked. Kwon did not answer right away, but his eyes seemed to have found the answer. He looked at James and nodded. I am ready, Uncle. I cannot keep God's love to myself. I want to share it with everyone, to help them feel the peace and healing that I have felt. Jacoby smiled. His eyes filled with pride. He knew that Kwon was ready. His maturity came not only from facing the past but also from his willingness to receive and give love. James put his hand on Kwon's shoulder and said gently, remember, Kwon, that your mission is not to change others, but to love and forgive them, just as God has loved and forgiven you. Only when you live in that love, can you be a light for this world. Kwon deeply felt every word of James. He understood that love was not something easy to grasp, but forgiveness and patience were the keys for him to step out of himself. He was determined to live according to God's teachings, so that his love would not just be empty words but become concrete actions in daily life. The next day, Kwon and James went to a nearby village. It was a small village with gentle but poor people. The dilapidated houses, muddy village roads, and sad faces reflected poverty and deprivation. Kwon looked into the eyes of the people here and felt the suffering in each of their eyes. But at the same time, he also felt a glimmer of hope in his heart. Uncle James, how can I help them? Kwon asked, the concern evident in his eyes. Jacoby smiled and looked at Kwon. You should start by listening. Kwon, when you listen with your heart, you will see the pain they are carrying. But most importantly, you must share God's love with them. Even if they do not ask for it or realize it, God's love has no limits. And neither do you. He began to walk along the village road, interacting with the people, sharing words of comfort and concern. Kwon did not know clearly whether his words could ease their pain, but he felt the change in his heart. Every smile, every handshake, every look of gratitude from the people made Kwon feel joy overflowing in his heart. He understood that every small action of his, although it could not change the whole world, could be a fire that lit up a dark heart. In the afternoon, when Kwon returned to Jacob, he no longer felt tired or bored. He felt a peace that he had never had before. He realized that when he shared love, he himself was healed. Love is not only a gift to receive, but also a mission to give. Jacoby looked at Kwon. His eyes lit up. You have seen it, Kwon. God's love is a great power, and it can change everything. When you live in that love, you not only heal yourself, but you can also help heal this world. Kwon felt his heart flutter. He knew this was just the beginning of a long journey, but with each step, he felt himself being renewed. He would never stop loving, never stop forgiving, and never stop sharing that love with the world around him. Kwon learned that love is not always a smooth journey. The gentle steps in God's peace taught him that everyone has to face challenges in life. And sometimes, Challenges are the way God's love trains and refines each person's faith. One morning, while Kwon was helping Jacob prepare breakfast in the small kitchen of the house, there was sad news from the village. A villager, Lan, had been seriously ill for many months. Despite trying to treat her, her illness showed no signs of improvement. Lan was the only one raising 3 young children, and when the news was heard, the whole village felt worried. Kwon felt a pang in his heart. He knew that, although he had heard about many cases of illness, this time, he felt Lan's pain like a stab straight to his heart. He could not stand by and watch her suffering without doing anything. James looked at Kwon, as if he already knew what he was thinking. "Kwon, do you want to visit Lan?" James asked. Kwon nodded. He knew that not only comfort, but God's love would be the strength to help them overcome this trial. When Kwon and James arrived at Lan's house, they saw her lying on the hospital bed. Her face haggard, her eyes tired. 3 children were sitting beside her, silently looking at their mother, their eyes sad. This scene made Kwon's heart ache. He didn't know where to start to bring hope to these people. James approached Lan, gently sat down by her bed, and began to talk to her. He talked about God's love, about the peace that God gave to everyone, even in the most painful moments. As for Kwon, he sat down next to the 3 children, gently stroked their hair, and began to tell stories about God's love, about the miracles God had performed in the lives of many. He was not sure that his words could ease their pain, but he knew that the love he shared was the greatest comfort. After a while of talking, James placed his hand on Lan's forehead, praying. Kwon joined in, praying with James for her, for the 3 children, and for the whole village. He did not pray for miracles, but he prayed for peace and strength so that they could face all the challenges of this life. Kwon and James stayed with Lan's family all afternoon. No miracles came right away, but Kwon realized that their presence, their prayers, and the love they shared had created a change in the atmosphere. Lan could not help but be moved and began to smile weakly as she looked at her children. Although her illness was not yet cured, the tears of despair seemed to have faded a little. The next day, when Kwon woke up, he felt a change in his heart. He knew that God's love came not only through physical healing but also through sharing and comforting in times of pain. The test of love is not without tears, but it is in those tears that God's love becomes clearer than ever. As Kwon walked in the garden, admiring the blooming flowers, he remembered the teachings of James. Love is the greatest power, and this power, sometimes, will be shown through patience and endurance, not through immediate change. He knew that God would always be there, accompanying him, no matter what challenges life brought. He couldn't change everything, but he could give love and peace, just like God had done for him. The next day, Kwon returned to visit Lan. The whole village knew about her situation, and when they saw Kwon come to visit, they felt a warmth in the air. A wave of love and hope seemed to spread throughout the small village. People began to pray together, share small gifts, and in that, God's love transformed into a united community. Kwon felt a new strength in his heart. Love is not just personal care, but solidarity in the community. Everyone can be a part of the healing, a part of the journey of love, no matter who they are, where they are. Kwon continued his journey with Jacob, but a strange feeling began to creep into his mind. After coming into contact with the suffering, the sick, and those living in poverty, he realized that love was not simply about sharing joy, but also a challenging journey. There were times when love had to face sacrifice, suffering, and the feeling of being abandoned. One morning, when Kwon and Jacob were preparing to leave the village to continue their journey, they received unfortunate news. Kwon's close friend, Tam, had met with a serious accident. He was seriously injured and was currently in critical condition. A feeling of anxiety filled Kwon's heart. He knew that, even though he was a person who prayed and shared love, when facing this great challenge, his heart could not avoid confusion and anxiety. Jacob looked at Kwon with a determined gaze. Kwon, are you ready to face this challenge? God will never abandon you. But you must learn to face suffering and understand that it is part of the journey of love. Kwon looked at Jacob. His eyes filled with determination. Although he still had fears in his heart. I am ready, Uncle Jacob. No matter what. I will not let pain overcome me. When Kwon arrived at the hospital where Tam was, he felt a heavy atmosphere. Tam was lying motionless on the bed. His face full of wounds. And his eyes closed. Kwon felt his heart tighten. But he knew that, at this moment, what he needed to do was not let fear take over him. He had to be the one to bring hope. Not only to Tam, but also to everyone around him. Jacob went with Kwon. And he put his hand on Kwon's shoulder, as if transmitting an invisible power to him. Kwon sighed. And walked to Tam's bedside. Tam, God is with us. God will not leave us alone at this time, Kwon said. In a firm but gentle voice, he sat by his bedside. Not saying anything more. Just silently praying. Kwon knew that praying was the only thing he could do at this time. He asked God to help Tam overcome the pain. To give him enough strength to accept all challenges. And also to keep his heart at peace in all circumstances. Time passed. And Tam's condition showed no signs of improvement. Kwon began to feel a fatigue not only physically but also mentally. The long nights in the hospital, sitting next to his best friend without being able to do anything to help, made him feel helpless. But it was in those moments that Jacob was close to him, like a guiding light. Kwon, do you see? Sometimes, love is not instant miracles, but love is perseverance. That is how God loves us, never giving up. Even in pain and trial. Kwon sat down and thought about James's words. He understood that love is not something easy. And sometimes, love requires sacrifice and patience. God loved humanity to the end. Even to the point of being nailed to the cross. That love is a love that does not turn back. Does not stop. And is unconditional. He sat down by Tam's bed. And this time, he prayed not only for him but also for himself. Kwon understood that, in order to share God's love, he had to learn to face the pain. And from there, love would become stronger, more steadfast. The next day, when Kwon went to the hospital, something miraculous happened. Tam, though still weak, opened his eyes and saw Kwon standing beside him. He held his hand, and said only one simple sentence. You will get through it. Tam. God is with us. Tam smiled weakly. But in his eyes, Kwon saw a ray of hope. He knew that love is not always immediate salvation. But it is presence, perseverance and sacrifice in every moment. The next day, when Kwon and Jacob sat together under the shade of the old tree in the garden, Kwon felt a peace in his soul. He had learned that, no matter how great the challenge, love will still be the guiding light. Sacrifice is not meaningless suffering, but the way for us to grow in love and faith. James looked at Kwon and smiled. I understand. Kwon, love is not just about healing, but a journey that requires sacrifice, patience, and mercy. God loves us not because we deserve it, but because He loves us unconditionally. Kwon nodded, feeling a deep joy in his heart. He realized that every trial was an opportunity for God's love to grow in his heart. And in every step, no matter how painful or difficult, that love would still light the way. Jesus was resurrected. And his resurrection was not just a historical event, but an invitation to live again in love and hope. Kwon understood that the resurrection did not just happen in a moment of history, but was a resurrection that each person could experience every day. In every step of their lives. It was a resurrection of love, hope and new life in every moment. One day, as Kwon walked through the village streets, he saw that the trees had changed their leaves. Spring was approaching, signaling a new life. The cold of winter had passed, giving way to warm rays of sunlight. Kwon felt a change in the air. A change not only in nature but also in his soul. He had been through trials and sufferings. But now, He felt like a plant that had blossomed after long days of withering. James, always a companion, sat next to Kwon under the shade of a large tree and looked into his eyes. With a gentle smile, "Kwon, what have you learned from this journey?" James asked. With a gentle look full of understanding, Kwon pondered for a moment and then answered, "I have understood that resurrection is not an event that only happens in the past, but is a continuous process in each day of our lives. Every time we face suffering, when we choose love and hope, that is when we are resurrected in God." James nodded, as if he had known Kwon's answer for a long time. "That's right, Kwon. Resurrection is the resurrection within each of us. When we let God's love resurrect in our souls, this does not happen just once, but is a continuous process. God has risen so that we too can rise every day, to turn suffering into strength, and love into life." Kwon continued his journey. But now, he felt different. Every morning, he woke up with a soul full of hope and faith. He not only saw resurrection in the nature around him, but also felt resurrection within himself. Difficult times were no longer challenges that hindered him, but opportunities for him to live more fully in God's love. A week later, Kwon returned to visit Lan's family. Although she was still not completely cured, her eyes were different from before. She gradually regained her faith, not only in physical healing but also in spiritual healing. Her children, though still saddened by their mother's condition, have also learned that resurrection is not just an extraordinary event but part of the journey of everyday life. They see their mother come alive in love and hope. "Sister Lan, you have changed," Kwon said. His eyes filled with admiration. Sister Lan smiled softly, a smile very different from the previous times. She replied, "That's right, Kwon. Thank you for being with me these past days. I couldn't see it, but now I realize that love and hope can help us overcome any challenge. I feel the resurrection not only in my body but also in my soul." In the following days, Kwon felt more connected to God, and also felt more deeply about his mission. He was no longer just a follower of God, but a person with faith and hope to share with those around him. Kwon became a source of new life, a resurrection for those who were suffering and in despair. One evening, as James and Kwon sat together, drinking a cup of hot tea, James turned to Kwon and said, "Have you found joy in life?" Kwon smiled and replied, "Yes. I have found joy in God's love. That love is not only physical healing but also spiritual resurrection. I am no longer afraid or worried, because I know that in every trial, God is always with me." The next day, when Kwon continued his journey, he was no longer just a lone pilgrim. He was a person carrying hope. Someone who shared God's love and resurrection wherever he went. No matter what life was like, Kwon knew that he could always live again every day, could always experience resurrection in God's love and hope. Kwon has gone through many trials in his journey, but there is one he never imagined would come to him: loss. In his heart, love and hope have always been the guiding lights. But there are times when the trials are so great that they seem insurmountable. One morning, when Kwon received the news that James had fallen seriously ill and had to be hospitalized, he felt a surge of fear in his heart. James had not only been his teacher and companion, but also a great source of spiritual encouragement in his journey. He had learned a lot from James, especially about how to face trials and suffering in the love of God. But now, his teacher was lying there, weak and in need of care. Kwon could not sit still. His heart could not bear the worry for his best friend. He immediately set off for the hospital, his mind filled with confusion and bewilderment. All the way, he prayed without ceasing, asking God to heal James, to give him the strength to face this challenge. When Kwon arrived at the hospital, James was lying in the hospital room, his eyes tired but still filled with peace. He sat by the hospital bed, held James's hand, and began to speak. "Uncle James, you will be fine. I pray for you every day, and I believe that God will protect you." Jacoby looked at Kwon, a faint smile appearing on his lips. He softly replied, "Don't worry too much. Kwon, pain is a part of life. And sometimes, trials are opportunities to bring us closer to God's love. God is always with us, whether in joy or in difficulty." Kwon sat silently for a moment, then said, "I understand, Uncle James. God is always with us. And this suffering will only be part of the journey. I will persevere. I will not give up." In the following days, Kwon returned to visit James every day. He felt the steadfastness in his heart. No matter how many challenges there were outside, God's love is not just a feeling of happiness or peace in easy times, but patience, the ability to overcome the greatest challenges in life without losing faith. Jacob taught Kwon that suffering is not the end, but part of the journey that leads to maturity and resurrection. Every day, Kwon found himself understanding more about God, about how he loves people, and how that love will help each person overcome difficulties, no matter how great they are. On the last day before Jacob was discharged from the hospital, Kwon sat by his bedside, and saw a great change in him. No longer a motionless patient, Jacob was able to sit up, although still weak, but in his eyes, Kwon saw a strength that he had never seen before. "Uncle Jacob, you are better," Kwon said. His eyes filled with joy. Jacoby smiled. "You see, Kwon, sometimes, it is in the trials that we find the strength to continue. God does not leave us alone. And in every trial, He gives us opportunities to live again in love and hope." Kwon nodded, feeling like he was reborn, like he was given more strength. God's love was truly alive in him, and he understood that, no matter what trials came, he would still live in that love, would live in the eternal hope that God had given to humanity. A week later, James had fully recovered, and he and his father continued their journey. However, this time, Kwon was no longer just a learner. He was a person who shared God's love with those around him, a person who helped those who needed comfort and hope. During these encounters, Kwon began to realize that the trials and sufferings he had experienced not only helped him grow, but also helped him understand his mission better. He understood that God's love was not just a preaching, but an action. God loved humanity not only through words but through actions, through sharing joy and hope, through standing beside those who suffered and helping them find new life in God's love. The next day, as Kwon stood with James, looking toward the horizon, he felt a deeper faith than ever. He understood that in every challenge, big or small, God is always there and gives each person the strength to overcome. He realized that steadfastness in God's love is not the absence of suffering, but the ability to accept and overcome that suffering. And from there, God's love will be shown in each person's own life. Kwon turned to look at James and said, "Uncle James, thank you very much. Your lessons have helped me grow. I will always remember your teachings, and live in God's love every day." James smiled, his eyes filled with joy and pride. "I understand, Kwon. God always leads us through every challenge, and through it, He helps us become stronger. That is God's love, a love that never abandons us." After witnessing James's recovery and realizing the great power that God's love can bring, Kwon felt a new inspiration in his heart. He was no longer just a pilgrim, but a messenger of love, a person carrying hope and faith, ready to share it with the world around him. The next day, Kwon stood on a small hilltop, where he could see the whole peaceful countryside. The gentle wind blew through his hair, and he felt his soul expand. He had survived trials, overcome pain and loss, and now he understood that resurrection was not just a distant concept but a part of everyday life. Kwon was no longer seeking peace for himself but was ready to share that joy with everyone. James, his close companion, came to Kwon's side. The two stood in silence for a moment, looking at the green fields below. James spoke up. "Are you ready, Kwon? God's love is not just for you to keep in your heart, but to share with everyone." Kwon looked into James's eyes, feeling a new strength in his heart. He answered with determination, I am ready, Uncle James. I do not want to live just for myself. I want to bring God's love to those who need it most. I want those who are suffering, those who are lost, to be able to see the light of resurrection in their lives. Kwon began a new journey. No longer just a lone pilgrim, but a messenger of love, hope and resurrection. He visited poor families, abandoned people and patients facing serious illnesses. Wherever he went, he carried with him the belief that resurrection could take place in every heart, even in the most difficult circumstances. One day, when Kwon visited a poor family, Mr. Min, the father of the family, shared the story of his difficult years. We lived in poverty, not knowing what to do to survive. But for some reason, when we prayed together, we felt a strange peace. I believe that God was always by our side, even when we felt like there was no hope. Kwon sat next to Mr. Min, listening to the story with emotion. He knew that, at times like this, God was present, giving them new hope. He said, God is always near us, even in the most difficult times. Resurrection is not something that can only be seen in the future, but something that we can feel in every moment. God's love is resurrected in us every day, when we choose to love and be patient. Throughout his journey, Kwon continually meets people who are seeking healing, spiritual renewal, and new life. He teaches them that resurrection is not just an event of the past, but something that can happen in every moment, every choice we make. It is a resurrection of love, forgiveness, and faith that never fails. Day by day, Kwon realizes more and more that his journey is not just about helping others, but also about learning and growing in God's love. Every person he meets is a part of his journey, and every story they share enriches his understanding of love and resurrection. One afternoon, Kwon meets Lan again, the woman he met in the early days of his journey. Lan has recovered and is now a companion in Kwon's work. Together, they share God's love with those who need comfort and hope. Lan smiled and said, "You have helped me see life again, Kwon. It is God's love that has helped me overcome all difficulties. And now I also want to help others find peace in Him." Kwon nodded, his heart filled with emotion. "Sister Lan, I am so happy to see that you have found joy again. Together we share God's love and help those around us. It is in these actions that we will see the resurrection taking place every day." Kwon knew that his journey would never end. Every day, he continued to share love and hope, bringing the light of resurrection to those around him. He understood that, no matter how difficult life was, God was always there, and He always gave each person the opportunity to live again in love and hope. The next day, as Kwon looked toward the horizon, he felt peace in his soul. He no longer fears trials or suffering, because he knows that God's love will always help him overcome everything. He will continue his journey, always carrying within him the hope, resurrection, and love of God. Kwon realized that his journey was not just about helping individuals, but about spreading God's love into every corner of the community. Once one person finds the light, he will bring that light to others. Kwon felt that he was not alone in this journey, but part of a larger community, where love and hope are shared, inspiring everyone. One morning, Kwon met Lan and a few other companions in a small village. Together, they started helping the villagers, who were facing many challenges in life. From poverty, illness to loss. Lan shared, "Kwon, we need to do more. God's love must be spread not only through our words but also through our actions. Every day, each small action of ours can change a whole life." Kwon smiled, feeling the resonance in her words. He said, "I understand. We are not only the recipients of love, but also the givers of that love. God's love is an endless source of power, and when we live in that love, we cannot keep it to ourselves." Kwon and his friends began to visit each family in the village. Each meeting was an opportunity for him to share God's love, to listen and support those in need. They helped poor families, taught them how to get ahead in life, and especially shared hope for a brighter tomorrow. One day, Kwon met Mr. Than, an elderly man in the village who had almost lost all faith in life. Mr. Than shared with Kwon that he had lost his wife and son in a traffic accident. And since then he felt his life was empty and purposeless. "I don't believe in anything anymore. Kwon, this life has too much suffering and loss. I don't know what to do anymore," Mr. Than said sadly. Kwon sat down next to him. Looking into his eyes with deep sympathy, he said softly, "Mr. Than, I understand the pain you are going through. But I also want to share with you something important. No matter how much suffering there is in life, God is always with us. He does not abandon us in the most difficult times. Suffering can make us feel lost, but God's love will be resurrected in us, and will help us continue to live strongly." Mr. Than looked at Kwon. His eyes seemed less sad. He continued, "I invite you to pray with us, so that in each prayer, you can feel the presence of God. And when you feel that love, we will find peace. Not in changing the situation, but in the way we perceive and face challenges." During the following days, Mr. Than began to participate in prayer sessions and community activities with Kwon and his companions. Gradually, he noticed a change in himself. He began to find hope again and began to share what he had with others. The community became warmer. Not only thanks to material help but also thanks to the sharing of love and faith in God. The small community that Kwon and his group of friends built gradually became a bright spot of love and hope. People who had lost their way, people who had lost faith in life, now found support and love in each other. Kwon understood that it was in these relationships that God's love truly spread and revived. One evening, when everyone gathered at Mr. Than's house to pray, Kwon stood looking around and felt the power of the community. The eyes, the smiles, the words of encouragement to each other, all reflected one thing: God was truly present in each of them. God's love was not just something far away, but something alive and real in every action, every thought, and every word. Ms. Lan, Kwon's longtime companion, looked at him and said, "Kwon, I think we have done something wonderful. We have not only helped others but also ourselves. In God's love, we have all found resurrection." Kwon felt it. He realized that in the journey of sharing love, he had also experienced resurrection in his own soul. He was no longer a person seeking comfort for himself, but a person bringing hope to the world around him. The next day, Kwon continued his journey. He and his companions continued to travel through the villages, carrying God's love, carrying hope and resurrection. He knew that, no matter how long or short the journey was, the ultimate goal was to make God's love a light that shone on everyone. God's love does not only live in special people, but lives in everyone, in every act of love and sharing. And Kwon understood that, when we live in God's love, we will find complete joy, not only in times of peace but also in times of trial and suffering. The next journey of Kwon and his companions took them to a remote land where the challenges seemed insurmountable. Storms had swept through the land, leaving many families homeless, many injured, and the community facing great challenges. But in these circumstances, Kwon realized that God's love is never absent, even in the darkest places. When Kwon and his group arrived in this land, they encountered unforeseen difficulties. Roads were destroyed, houses were in ruins, and everything was lacking. The villagers looked at them with skeptical eyes, but in Kwon's eyes, they saw faith and hope. No matter how difficult it was, God's love still existed in each person, in every gesture, every action. On the first day in the village, Kwon and his companions set to work. They cleaned up the rubble, repaired collapsed roofs, and most importantly, they listened to each family's story, shared their pain, and helped them find hope in God's love. Kwon visited one particular family, that of Mr. Lok, an elderly man who had lost his wife and only son in the storm. Mr. Lok sat alone in his shattered home, his eyes staring into the distance, as if he had no more strength left. "I have nothing left to live for. Kwon, God has abandoned me. I feel like a useless person." Mr. Locke said in a sad voice. Kwon sat down next to him. His heart filled with sympathy. He looked at him with patience in his eyes and gently replied, Mr. Locke, God never abandons us. He is with us in every challenge. Every pain. Suffering can make us feel lonely. But God's love will always be present. He will help us overcome everything. He continued, this life is full of challenges. But each challenge is an opportunity for us to live in God's love. Your story is not over, Mr. Locke. It is your resilience, your faith in God's love that will help you stand up and continue. Mr. Locke looked at Kwon, his eyes starting to have a little light. Although he was still in pain, Kwon knew that these words had given him new hope. Kwon invited him to join the prayers and rebuild the village together. Every little thing, every prayer, brought hope and recovery. In the following days, Kwon and his companions continued to work tirelessly. The whole community began to feel the change. No matter how many difficulties they faced, they no longer felt alone. Kwon witnessed many families being reborn in God's love, recovering not only physically but also spiritually. They began to realize that God's love can overcome any challenge. And even in the darkness, He is always the guiding light. One afternoon, Kwon and his companions stood together on a small hill, overlooking the village they had helped. Kwon felt peace in his heart, even though there were still ruins all around. He looked into the eyes of each person in the group and knew that, although challenges still lay ahead, they had found strength in God's love. We cannot change the past, but we can change the way we perceive and face the future, Kwon said. Lan, Kwon's companion, nodded in agreement. That's right, Kwon. God's love is an endless source of strength, not only helping us overcome pain but also helping us stand up every time we fall. Although Kwon and his group could not do everything, what they did changed an entire community. God's love became the driving force that helped people overcome difficulties and look back at life. Every day, they not only survived, but also lived with hope. Living in God's love. Kwon realized that sometimes, challenges are not what we want, but it is in those challenges that God's love becomes clearest and strongest. He also understood that, on this journey, God gave him the strength to persevere, not only for himself, but for the people around him. The next day, as Kwon stood watching the village gradually recover, he felt a deep joy. Not because the work was done, but because he knew that in every action, in every person he met, God was present, bringing joy and new life. He knew that, no matter how difficult life was, God's love was always a bright light to guide the way. And he also understood that, in that love, resurrection was not just a religious concept, but something that could be present in every moment, in every act of love. Finally, the journey of Kwon and his companions through each hamlet, each village, carrying the light and love of God, has come to an end. But in each person's heart, this journey has never truly ended, because God's love is an endless circle, never stopping. Kwon stood on a small hill, looking out at the whole village that had changed. The sun was gradually setting on the horizon. The gentle golden light covered every roof, every road, and even the people he had met along the way. This scene was like a beautiful painting, full of peace and new life. The houses were no longer in ruins. The roads were no longer rough. Everything seemed to be reborn thanks to love, resilience, and faith in God. Kwon took a deep breath, feeling the peace in every breath. He knew that although life would always have challenges, if they lived in God's love, they would never be alone. Sister Lan came to Kwon, put her hand on his shoulder, and said, "We have done a lot, Kwon. Hearts have been healed. Fires of hope have been lit. God has been with us every step of the way." Kwon nodded, his eyes shining with pride and humility. But in truth, everything can only happen thanks to God's love. We are just tools. He is the creator and healer. Each of us has a mission, and I believe our mission is to help people feel His love. The others in the group also gathered around Kwon and Sister Lan. They looked at each other, without needing to say much. Because they all understood that God's love had changed their lives. And through them, that love would continue to spread. A child ran up, smiling brightly when he saw Quan and his friends. The boy approached Quan, handing him a bright wildflower, as a small but meaningful gift. Quan smiled, took the flower and placed it on the baby's head. "Thank you, my child. You have brought me joy," Quan said. The baby looked at Quan with pure and happy eyes. "I want to always live in God's love, like my grandparents, parents, and siblings have taught me." The baby's words were like an affirmation, a deep impression in Quan's heart and everyone else's. God truly lived in the hearts of the people here, and that love would never fade. Finally, Quan looked towards the distant horizon, where birds flew freely, towards a bright future. He understood that this journey might end here, but the journey of God's love would always continue, without stopping. The story of life, of hope, of joy in God's love never stops. When Quan turned to look at his companions, he no longer saw challenges or hardships, but only a community resurrected in God's love, a community of which he was a part. God's love was the strength that helped them overcome all challenges, and would be the inspiration for the next journey. Thank you, God," Quan said, his heart filled with gratitude. His love will always be the strength for us to continue this journey. They stood, looking together at the newly formed villages, knowing that no matter how life changed, God's love remained steadfast and alive, spreading from one heart to another. That community was not just a village, but a symbol of love, resilience, and hope. And Quan's journey continues. But every step he takes, every person he meets, is a part of the infinite love that God has sown in their lives. With God's blessing, this journey is not the end, but a new beginning for those who want to live in His love. And Quan, like everyone else, will continue to share the full joy, the steadfast faith in God's unconditional love, in every step, every smile, and every action. God's love is light, and that light will never be extinguished.